Dawn had just touched the savannah with a pink glow, but the sleeping lion's back was already bustling with life. A small bird busily strutted across his mane, as if it weren't the mane of the king of beasts, but an ordinary meadow. The lion didn't move. One flick of his paw, and the bird would have been reduced to a mere handful of feathers. But the paw lay still, and the predator's eyes were closed. Is friendship even possible between Africa's most dangerous predator and a creature the size of a human palm? Or is it simply a happy bargain, where everyone gets what they deserve until they let the other down? Like and subscribe to the channel. Here we go. Did you know that the oxpecker, a bird most often seen on the backs of buffalo and giraffes, occasionally perches on lions, though this is a much rarer and riskier prospect? In this episode, you'll learn why the oxpecker even dares to approach a predator capable of swallowing it with a single swipe of its jaws, what the bird searches for on a lion's body if it's almost completely free of ticks, and why some scientists talk about aid while others talk about covert blood theft. The oxpecker isn't the most conspicuous bird in Africa, unless you look closely. It's slightly larger than a starling, with a dull, grayish-brown plumage, but its bill is distinctive. It's flat, sharp at the edges like small scissors, and designed by nature for one purpose: combing parasites out of the fur of large animals. Scientists distinguish two species of oxpecker: the red-billed oxpecker, Buphagus erythrorhynchus, and the yellow-billed oxpecker, Buphagus africanus. Both inhabit the savannas south of the Sahara and lead a nearly identical lifestyle. They spend their days sitting on the backs of ungulates, scavenging everything edible from their hides. To cling to the body of a running buffalo or a leaping zebra, the oxpecker needs tenacious claws, sharp and strongly curved, almost like a woodpecker's. The bird's tail is stiff, and it uses it to support itself as it crawls upside down, searching for ticks in the most inaccessible places, under the arms, at the base of the tail, and around the ears. These are precisely where the parasites thrive, as they are harder for the animal to reach. The oxpecker's diet consists primarily of ticks, but not exclusively. The bird pecks fly larvae, lice, and other small parasites living on the skins of large mammals. Researchers observing oxpeckers in the wild have noted that in a single day, an active bird can consume a quantity of ticks comparable in weight to its own body. For a small bird, this is a huge amount of food. And this is precisely why the oxpecker so persistently sticks close to large animals. To it, they are not just neighbors, but a food source that carries its own food. Ungulates rarely chase away oxpeckers. A buffalo can stand motionless for long periods while a bird examines its hide inch by inch. A giraffe allows a bird to perch on its neck and head. Scientists have long described this as a classic example of symbiosis, a relationship in which both parties benefit. But nature is rarely simple. Some observations have shown that birds don't always limit themselves to ticks. They sometimes peck at existing wounds to get blood. More on this later, when we discuss lions specifically. Now let's return to the most unusual companion you'll see in the savannah: an oxpecker on a lion. Unlike a buffalo or a zebra, a lion's coat is a completely different story. It has short, dense fur, which is far less suitable for ticks than the fur of herbivores. Lions also groom themselves meticulously, licking their fur, which helps naturally remove some of the parasites. There are significantly fewer ticks on a lion's body than on a buffalo or wildebeest, which graze in tall grass, where the parasites literally lie in wait for prey at the tips of the stems. So what is an oxpecker looking for when it perches on a lion's mane? If there aren't many ticks there, and the lion's mane owner is the most dangerous predator in the savannah, why would the bird even risk it? Observations show that oxpeckers linger on the bodies of predators significantly less frequently, and for a much shorter time, than on the bodies of antelopes or buffalo. This, in itself, suggests that such proximity is the exception rather than the rule. But when it does occur, something happens that makes scientists take a closer look. Lions are animals that constantly suffer injuries. Hunting large prey rarely goes without consequences. The horns, hooves, and teeth of rivals leave scratches, cuts, and open wounds on the lion's body. Fights between males for territory or mates also leave their mark. And this is where the oxpecker comes into play. The bird can smell and see open wounds from a distance, and it is precisely these wounds, apparently, that attract it most to the lion's body. Fly larvae accumulate near damaged skin, and ticks often attach themselves there, taking advantage of the weakened area. For the oxpecker, this is a veritable feast. The food concentration there is much higher than on healthy skin. This brings us to the main question of the release. If an oxpecker lands on a lion, not for a simple cleaning, but for its wounds, is it a nurse, aiding in healing, or an uninvited guest, exploiting another's pain for its own benefit? There's no definitive answer yet. Some studies suggest that oxpeckers reduce the tick load on their host animals and are beneficial. Other observations cast doubt on this notion. Apparently, the bird sometimes doesn't simply clean the wound, but digs deeper to get to the blood, which is also part of its diet. And here we come to the most surprising detail. An adult lion fears virtually no other savanna animal. But he can't see his own back, the back of his neck, or the base of his tail. He can't reach the wound between his shoulder blades with his tongue. It's precisely where the king of the beasts himself can't reach that the little bird finds itself. Therefore, the lion often simply tolerates its presence, not because he trusts it, but because the cost of inaction is lower than the cost of the extra effort to drive it away. But unlike a buffalo, a lion's skin is almost completely free of ticks, meaning it's not just parasites. What happens when the oxpecker stops being a mere cleaner and begins to interfere with the wound itself, where healing collides with the bird's hunger? The open wound on the lion's side is healing slowly. Every day, a small bird lands on it, and each time it returns again and again. What if the aid the oxpecker came to offer is actually hindering the lion's recovery? Scientists didn't immediately notice this oddity. For a long time, the oxpecker was described solely as a nurse, a bird that benefits any animal it perches on. The logic was simple. Fewer ticks means fewer diseases. Fewer larvae in a wound means less risk of infection. But when researchers began to closely observe the oxpecker's behavior on wounds, the picture became more complex. It turns out that the bird doesn't always limit itself to what's already dead or infected. Sometimes it continues pecking at the wound even after the dead tissue and larvae have long since been removed, leaving living flesh beneath its beak. The blood that leaks out also becomes food for the oxpecker. Scientists speculate that blood, and not just parasites, may be one of the reasons why the bird is so persistently drawn to the open wounds of large animals. This observation has led some researchers to rethink the image of the oxpecker. Not just a cleaner, but sometimes a creature that exploits another's injury longer than is necessary to provide relief. For the lion, this behavior could mean the wound is healing more slowly than it should. Constant irritation of the same spot, even slightly, prevents the skin from healing. This isn't fatal and doesn't turn the oxpecker into a predator. It's too small to pose a real threat to the lion. But it does cast doubt on the simple bird heals lion theory. The relationship turns out to be far more complex. Sometimes it's about helping. Sometimes it's about exploiting another's weakness. And yet the lion continues to tolerate the oxpecker's presence. Why doesn't a predator that can kill virtually any savanna animal with a single blow of its paw chase away the small bird, even when it's clearly bothering him? Here, another aspect of this relationship comes to the fore. Not concern for the wound, but something like an early warning system. The oxpecker is a nervous bird and extremely sensitive to movement around it. When something approaches, a person, a car, another predator, the bird emits a sharp, piercing alarm call and takes off. This has long been observed and well studied in ungulates such as buffalo and zebra. A herd reacts to the oxpecker's call faster than to its own sight or hearing, because the bird, perched high on the animal's back, notices danger sooner. It is believed that something similar happens with lions, although this has been much less studied than oxpecker behavior on ungulates. A lion, dozing in tall grass, isn't always aware of its surroundings. Its vision is well adapted for twilight and hunting, but not for constant all-round surveillance while resting. An oxpecker, perched on its back or mane, has a more advantageous vantage point and reacts to movement almost instantly. The bird's sharp cry, roused from its perch, can awaken not only the lion it was perched on, but also the entire pride resting nearby. In this sense, an oxpecker sometimes acts as an unintentional alarm, even if it doesn't realize it's warning the lion of danger and simply saving its own life. It's worth emphasizing that this behavior of oxpeckers toward lions is far less well documented than their role as guard dogs toward buffalo or rhinoceroses, where this phenomenon has been thoroughly studied. For lions, this is more of a logical assumption based on the species' general behavioral pattern than a definitively confirmed fact, and scientists prefer to speak cautiously about it, as a probable, but not yet fully explored, aspect of their relationship. There's another detail that makes the lion-oxpecker bond unique. Unlike buffalo, which graze in large herds and almost always alongside oxpeckers, lions are much more unpredictable hosts. The pride hunts, then rests, and then migrates long distances in search of prey. It's difficult for an oxpecker to constantly accompany a lion, as it would a herd of buffalo grazing in the same patch of savannah for weeks. Therefore, encounters between lions and oxpeckers are much more random, not a permanent partnership, but rather episodic visits that occur when the paths of the bird and predator cross. Because of this inconsistency, relationships between species don't have time to become as firmly established as those between the oxpecker and ungulates. Each encounter is like a new acquaintance. The lion tolerates the bird, not because it recognizes it as an old friend, but because the oxpecker's appearance is generally not perceived as a threat. The predator's instinct is tuned to large prey and rivals its own size. A small, agile bird simply doesn't fall into the danger or food category, despite the lion being technically quite capable of catching it. But what happens when the bird overdoes it? When the wound doesn't heal for weeks and the oxpecker keeps returning to the same spot again and again? Does this moment mark the beginning of a real conflict between the predator and its little guest? Or does the lion simply continue to tolerate the inconvenience because the cost of retaliation is still greater than the cost of patience? A lion's flank wound eventually heals, with or without the oxpecker. Nature doesn't adjust its mechanisms to the human convenience of friend or foe. It works differently, through a balance of benefits and risks that is maintained for centuries, even if it seems fragile from the outside. Based on available observations, actual conflict between a lion and an oxpecker almost never occurs. Even if the bird lingers on the wound for a little longer, the lion rarely reacts with aggression. The reason is simple. The cost of retaliation for the predator is higher than the cost of patience. To drive away the oxpecker, the lion must expend energy, interrupt its rest, and risk disturbing the wound itself with a sudden movement. It is much easier to simply ignore the bird, especially since the harm it causes, if any, is minimal compared to the benefit of removing ticks and potentially warning of danger. This is why most researchers today describe the relationship between the oxpecker and the lion neither as a clear-cut symbiosis nor as parasitism, but as something in between. a model that biologists sometimes call conditionally beneficial coexistence. For the oxpecker, the lion is a rare but nutritious food source, access to which comes with a certain risk. For the lion, the oxpecker is a minor inconvenience for which the predator pays a minimal price, receiving in return the removal of parasites from hard-to-reach areas of the body, and perhaps an extra pair of eyes in the savannah. There is no contract or conscious choice here. There are millions of years of natural selection that have weeded out those behavioral strategies that proved too costly for both parties. This story of the lion and the oxpecker is just one of many similar connections that permeate the African savanna. The oxpecker alights on buffalo, giraffe, zebra, hippopotamus, rhinoceros, wildebeest, dozens of herbivore species, each time playing roughly the same role, a cleaner, obtaining food where the owner of the hide cannot reach. But the lion's case demonstrates how thin the line between assistance and exploitation can be, even within the same helper species. The same bird, the same beak, and the result for the hide's owner can be either beneficial or slightly harmful, depending on what exactly it is looking for at the time: a tick, a larva, or a drop of blood from a still open wound. The savannah relies on such connections for far more than might initially appear. Cleaning birds, cleaning fish in rivers, insects that disperse plant seeds, all are part of a vast web of mutual dependencies, where large and small species need each other, even if their size and strength are vastly different. A lion, the king of the beasts, capable of killing almost any animal on the savannah, finds itself dependent on a palm-sized creature simply because it can't reach its own back with its tongue. This is one of the most fascinating lessons of wild nature. Strength and vulnerability almost always go hand in hand, and one species' territorial dominance doesn't negate its need for other, much more humble neighbors. Let's return to the image with which this episode began. Dawn, a sleeping lion, and a small bird calmly pacing his mane. Now, knowing the whole story, this picture looks different. It's not an idyll or a scene of friendship in the human sense of the word, but neither is it a story of pure exploitation. It's a balance, fragile, imperfect, sometimes even a little painful for the lion, but a balance that nature maintains without any contracts, only by instinct and centuries of selection for the most resilient survival strategies. Even the king of beasts, it turns out, has his little allies. Not by free will, not by calculation in the human sense, but simply because it's evolved that way over millions of years of co-evolution. And without such unnoticeable neighbors, a lion's life in the savannah would be a little more difficult. There are more ticks, more wounds infected with unknown causes, and more dangers noticed a little too late. The oxpecker doesn't ask permission to perch on the predator's mane, and the lion doesn't thank him for the visit. But this strange encounter repeats itself time after time, meaning, on some fundamental, unconscious level, it's worth it for both. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like. It truly helps the channel grow. Subscribe to stay up to date with new stories about unexpected connections in the wild. And let me know in the comments, do you think what's happening between the lion and the oxpecker is friendship, albeit a strange one, or simply mutual benefit, with no real attachment in sight? I'd love to hear your thoughts.